So, maybe a video or two, maybe it was last video, maybe it was a video or two ago at this point. I put out a video explaining what I call the Sleight-of-Hand school of counter-apologetics. Now, I'm going to elaborate on that right now and tell you how it works, and this is really how it works. This is really good insight. I've seen this with my own eyes in action. So if you're a Christian, pay attention. If you're an atheist, sit this out for a couple minutes and look the other way. Don't listen. Now you can listen. Okay, so I saw this work with my own eyes. The Sleight-of-Hand school of counter-apologetics. This is literally how it works, almost round the boards. So once upon a time, I saw this girl on Twitter. This is a true story. And she was calling herself wiser than I was. Wiser than I was, meaning now she's an atheist. She came on to Twitter as a Christian. Yeah. And now she's wiser than she was as an atheist. So what happened? Once upon a time, she was a fundamentalist Christian. Goes to herself, can't wait to get on Twitter. I'm going to lead all these atheists to the Lord. I'm all fired up for Jesus. Charge! So she comes charging on Twitter, but doesn't know what she doesn't know. And the atheist made quick work of her. So she comes up to him and goes, hey guys, young earth creationism. And they go, sorry miss. Somebody seems to have, you don't seem to have all the facts down. Young earth creationist is probably false. Look, here's the evidence. It seems, according to the evidence, that the earth is billions of years old. So they get inside her head and they rattle her cage. But then they take it a step further. This is where it gets deeply misleading. Had they stopped there and said, which they didn't do, I promised, if they had integrity, they would have said, young earth creationism is false, missy. You should probably rethink your Christianity. What instead they said was they trucked in inferences that don't logically follow or automatically apply. They said, look, young earth creationism isn't that well evidenced, missy. Ergo, Christianity is false. Ergo, God does not exist. How do I know they did that? Because she became an atheist. She became an atheist. And I know for a fact that they never once did they give her one scintilla of a piece of evidence to evidence the proposition God does not exist. In other words, they gave her literally zero justification to become an atheist. What they did was they misled her. They said, look, young earth creationism is false, girlie. Ergo, Christianity is probably false. Ergo, God does not exist. How do I know they didn't give her a scintilla of a piece of evidence to demonstrate to her that God does not exist? Why? Because they never do. Ask him to. Go out right now and say, hey, prove that God does not exist. Guess what they're going to say? You're the one making the positive claim, Craig. You're the one making the positive claim. You tried to switch the burden of proof. That's exactly what they're saying. They never, ever, ever. There's a little bit different with some of the Answers from Reason crew are trying to change that. But with her, these were standard issue atheists, and they never give one piece of evidence to make her think that God does not exist. What they did was they misled her. They said, look, young earth creationism is probably false. Then they got her on Old Testament scriptures. She's a fundamentalist Christian. So she went down easy. They said, look, there's a challenging scripture in the Old Testament. Smashed her head against a stone. And if she wasn't prepared, she probably went, oh, I didn't even know the Bible said that. Oh my God. Do we mean the Bible endorses slavery? Oh my God. God probably doesn't exist. I'm an atheist now. That's exactly what happened, guys. How do I know that happens? Round the boards. So that is the Sleight-of-Hand school of counter-apologetics in a nutshell. It is a deeply misleading form of argumentation. It predicates on trucking in inferences that don't logically follow. You win a debate with somebody, and the inferences should only stay with what can be inferred. So you say to her, look, the evidence suggests that the earth is millions of years old. Okay, then you should probably rethink your young earth creationism. That's it. I'm not a young earth creationist. Why? Because the evidence suggests, just like the atheist said, that the earth is millions or billions of years old. Whatever, one or the other, I forget. Bill, probably billion. I think billion, 6 billion, whatever. Whatever. So it has nothing to do with atheism. It's not a justification for atheism at all. It is a justification to possibly rethink young earth creationism. That's it. That's the only thing that can be inferred. Now, let's go to my Stephanie argument. Some of you are wondering, why does Craig Reed think this argument is so killer? Why? Because it's predicated on the same grounds. Just like they got up in her snout and rattled her cage, okay? based on them knowing something that she didn't know. This is Stephanie going to get up inside the snout of you, the atheist. Yeah, she is. Like I said, I won't say it again. Stephanie is coming and she doesn't look happy to see you. I really like the line, so I just keep saying, she doesn't look happy to see you. Stephanie is coming, and she's got two prongs to her relentless attack on your atheism, which you will fall to. She's going to go, one, how do you justify your atheist worldview? If you didn't hear her correctly, she said, or clearly, she said, how do you justify your atheist worldview? Prong two, what is the status of abstract objects given atheism? She said, what is the status of abstract objects given atheism? And just like the young earth creationist, you are going to struggle to answer her. Why? Because there isn't a good answer. What is the status of abstract object given atheism? Here's the truth. There ain't one. Uh-oh. Yeah, uh-oh. When I watched Jay Dyer versus Matt Dillahunty, okay, keep in mind, Matt Dillahunty is possibly the best debater in the atheist community. You're an atheist listening to me? Who are you again? I'm nobody, Craig. Yeah, I understand that. That's why I asked. Nobody important. I understand. Oh, that's a little cool, Craig. All right. I retract that. Are you Dave Rollins? Dave Rollins is a somebody atheist. If you're anybody else but that, just about, you're a nobody atheist. You ain't no Matt Dillahunty. Let's put it that way. There certainly ain't no Matt Dillahunty, Craig. You got him on that one. You ain't no Matt Dillahunty. Never will be. never are. What is it? Sometimes I dress around. Sometimes I dance around the room in my underwear. Doesn't make me Madonna. Never will. Sometimes you make arguments for God too, atheist. Does arguments against God too, atheist. Doesn't make you Matt Dillahunty. Never will. You ain't no Matt Dillahunty. There ain't no Matt Dillahunty, Craig. You nailed him on that one. Okay. So now that it's established you ain't no Matt Dillahunty. In his argument with Jay Dyer, basically it chiseled down to a stalemate. And the stalemate was this. Matt Dillahunty clearly acknowledged, yes, the laws of logic exist. They are immaterial, transcendent, inviolate. Why is that important? Because the question Stephanie would ask of him is, what is the status of abstract objects given atheism? And he is granting them status. He says, yes, the laws of logic exist. They are transcendent, immaterial, inviolate. Then, what is the status? So how does he justify them given atheism? His answer was, I'm not aware that I have to justify them. I'm not aware. This was literally his answer in the debate, guys. It basically devolved into a stalemate over that one question. The one abstract object that Matt Dillahunty would clearly say, yes, he uses, so he would acknowledge its status, ontological status, then being asked to define it in his epistemology. So now that he's granted its status in his ontology, it needs to be accounted for in his epistemology. He said, I'm not aware that I have to account for it. I'm not aware that you demonstrated to me the need to account for it. Why is that important? Because his answer was, I can't. That is, I can't by an intelligent person. And Graham Oppie, really good philosopher, right? Same argument, same idea. He says, brute facts, period. So the question Stephanie lays before you, the atheist, what is the status of abstract objects given atheism? What is the status of abstract objects given atheism? Has no really good answer, even amongst the smart set atheists and the good philosopher atheists. It's really hard to answer. So Stephanie will fight the smart set atheists to a draw. The top tier, the top 10% or the 20% of the atheist community, the bottom 80%, dust. They won't even know what the F she's talking about. Swear to God, the underneathlings, the top 20% will be fought to a draw on this argument. Why? Because there isn't really a good answer. But they'll be able to maneuver intellectually and sound smart and say, well, I don't really have a good answer, but I'm not aware that you've demonstrated to me that I need to provide a good answer. That's exactly what Matt Dillahunty said, word for word, pretty much. Why is that halfway decent? Because that's the only out you got. It's the only out you got. That's the best debater in the atheist community. And Graham Oppie is probably the best philosopher in the atheist community. So I got you on both prongs. That's their answer. There isn't a better one out there so far. And I don't foresee there becoming one. Why? Because it's really hard to account for anything transcendent, immaterial, inviolate, other than matter and motion, given atheism. That's why. It's really hard. Do you get it now? Do you see why this is a really, really challenging and good argument? Stephanie is going to rock you with this. She is going to, what are you going to do against Stephanie? Going to tear out their innards and feed it to their children. She's going to tear out your innards and feed it to your children. If that sounds a little too hardcore, Craig. It sounds a little hardcore, but there's a logic to it. What? If she makes example of one of you and eviscerates you, abjectly, publicly humiliates you, shreds you limb from bloody limb. That's what you're going to do, Steph. I'm going to shred him limb from bloody limb. I'm going to publicly humiliate and eviscerate you so that you can't, and then I'm going to salt the earth so that your children never rise again. Something like that. It's going to be absolutely terrible. She makes an example of one of you, she never has to do it again. That's why there's a logic to her being that much of a badass. I apologize to whoever gets in her gun sights first. You go down. No, seriously, it's a great argument. The top tier atheists have no good answer for it. The bottom 80% of the atheist community won't even know what the F you're talking about. I can tell you what the dumbass atheists are going to say. They're going to say, atheism's not a worldview, Craig. Okay. Okay, fair enough. You got me. Yeah, okay, but it is... Atheism does entail certain commitments and does rule out certain other commitments. And there are certain worldviews that are automatically usually entailed in atheism and philosophies. For example, usually materialism, empiricism, naturalism. So no, technically it's not a worldview, but there are worldviews that tend to be automatically entailed by atheism and undergird it. Hello. So that little statement that the dumbass atheists are going to say, they've already said it. Atheism is not a worldview, Craig. I've already got that. Go look at the comments. I've already got that one a few times. I'm going to get that one more. That's the sure tip-off. What? This is a dumbass atheist. Rock his world. Now, the reason why this argument is a lot more integrity than the Sleight-of-Hand school of counter-apologetics is because, now let me unpack it for you so that you see that it's actually a good argument. It's not deeply misleading at all. Matter of fact, it is precise. It's not misleading in the slightest. It is asking you to examine the foundation of your worldview and realize that it's really hard to justify. For real. So you can truck in inferences that logically follow and automatically imply. It's really hard to justify atheism if we sign on to a form of Platonic realism. So let's unpack that. Now, one of the things I realized, I was watching this Sean Carroll stream on, and he had this kind of king of the nominalists on, this philosopher guy, Jody Asuzu or something like that, Asuzi, who's basically like Mr. Nominalist. He's like a nominalist about everything. This guy was so much of a nominalist that he was literally arguing in the stream that Microsoft, the corporation, doesn't exist. Why is he saying that? It's an abstraction. Now that's really, really out there. Most nominalists won't go that far. That's way, way, way like. And Sean Carroll was almost 100% on board with everything he was saying. Why? Because I've told you, Sean Carroll is a scientismist and a committed physicalist. And I watched that philosophy thing that Sean Carroll's God is not a good theory. Those two guys brought it up again. I watched that years ago. Sean Carroll he's a really smart guy. His philosophy is a mess. His philosophy is an absolute mess. Why? Because he's been a scientismist for a long time. And he's a really bright guy. I've learned most of my quantum mechanics I've learned from him. Or most of my physics, a lot of it I've learned from him. He's a brilliant man. But he's philosophically a mess. When he was doing that God is not a good theory thing, he was all over the place. He was conflating the problem of induction with deductive reasoning. It was just like almost unwatchable. Now, he easily could learn his mistakes in philosophy, but he'd have to take 2 or 3 courses in philosophy, and then he'd be up to speed. Then he'd know what the mistakes he was making. But, okay, the reason why I brought this up, Sean Carroll offered to this guy talking about nominalism that up until about 2 or 3 years ago, Sean Carroll had no idea what nominalism was. So I'm saying to myself, wow, I'm throwing these terms around pretty loosely, just assuming that everybody in the audience knows what I'm talking about. And if Sean Carroll didn't really know what it means, I got to assume that most of you listening don't really know what it means. So let's unpack. Now, before I unpack, here's the caveat. If you are an atheist, this is very, 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 very important. Very important. If you don't get this, Stephanie's going to club you. She's going to kiss your kids goodbye. Why? She's going to feed it. She's going to tear out your innards and feed them to your children, as she said a few times now. So, atheists will say, Christians so irrational and so irrational. Let's do a little defining of rationality. The rational actor, if I give you 2 options, and one option is a better explanation of a theory. Okay, the rational actor at least tacitly signs on to the better explanation 100 times. How often? 100 times out of 100. Every single solitary time. Why? That is the very definition of rationality. The very definition. So if I say to you, young earth creationism, and you say back to me, it's not very well evidenced, Craig. And I'm like, really? It's not? No, it seemed the evidence would suggest that the earth is billions of years old. You should rethink it. Then I will rethink it. Why? Because that is a rational decision-making process in action. It is the better explanation if the evidence seems to suggest that the earth is billions of years old. So I at least tacitly sign on to the older earth theory. Why? Because it's better evidence. That's a rational decision. That is the definition of rationality. You opt for the better explanation 100 times out of 100. To not do so means you are basing your conclusions on something else, ideology usually. And it's, by definition, irrational. Now, that doesn't mean that it's automatically right. Okay? There might be something about the young earth creationist position that I don't know. They might have some killer argument out there that settles it for them. They might say, here's this one part of the Bible, Craig, and it says this. What? I, the Lord, have tried to fool you all by making it look like the earth is billions of years old, when in fact it's 6,000. Oh, I didn't know the Bible said that. That settles it. You see what I'm saying? There may be some sort of argument that none of us are aware of that settles it in favor of them. But overall, that's why the rational actor tacitly signs on to the better explanation, barring further explanation. So they, kind of go with the one that seems to better fit. Why? Because that's the rational decision-making process in action. Your wife gives you 2 job choices, and you do a rational thought process of which one pays better, which one this, which one that, and you go through the facts. And you decide, based on the facts, tacitly at least, this one seems a little better suited. Why? Because that's what the evidence would suggest. Rational actor, that's the rational decision-making process in action. Now, why did I go through that whole elaborate song and dance? Because I'm about to explain to you nominalism. As I figured out, most of you probably don't really know what nominalism means as it pertains to philosophy. So let's unpack it. There is something that I've been throwing around. I've been throwing around a term called transcendent categories. Something I borrowed from Kant, but I've expanded the definition. Transcendent categories, according to Kant, are specific, and there are 12 of them. Transcendent categories, according to me, is I folded in some of the things that are called abstract objects, generally speaking, out there in philosophical land. So you have something like a mathematical axiom. Pretty sure Kant didn't consider that a transcendent category. You have something known as the laws of logic. Basically, everything that is an abstract object, I'm saying there are 12 transcendent categories, it could be more like 30. Everything that falls under the category of an abstracta or an abstract object, okay, automatically the debate arises. Does it exist or does it not? Why does the debate arise? There's not a clear definition of abstract objects, but good working definition is something that has no spatial temporal locality. I always throw in there, and hence cannot be empirically verified for. I always throw that one in there, why it's really important for what we are discussing in our videos. Okay? And then there's some other criteria that get tossed around. But the main criteria is something that is transcendent, immaterial, and has no spatial temporal locality. So mathematical axioms, laws of logic, some of them you won't know are transcendent categories. Why? Because it's not immediately obvious unless you really know philosophy well. So I'm going to say something like the past. The past, yeah, the past. Transcendent category. Why? It has no spatial temporal locality. You cannot empirically verify for the past. There are people who literally argue the past does not exist. There are the self. The self, yes. Every time something comes up that is transcendent, immaterial, invisible, okay, there's always going to be a type of person who is going to try to relegate that thing to the status of non-existence. That is called a nominalist. What are they doing? They're saying it is a label for something that doesn't actually exist, a convenient label. Do you get it so far? I explained that a little sloppily. So there are things called abstract objects. Okay, mathematical axioms and laws of logic are the 2 easiest to understand. There isn't a clearly defined set of criteria, but the criteria usually includes no spatial temporal locality, immaterial, transcendent. Okay? So it does not technically exist in space and time. Hence, you have a type of person who says, ergo, it doesn't exist. Do you understand immediately why that's 100 times more consistent with atheism? Can you easily see why an atheist would be in their best interest to be consistent, to automatically relegate all of these things to the status of non-existent? Why? It's 100 times more consistent with atheism. If you don't understand that, just think about it. So that's what a nominalist is. And there are nominalists about everything under the sun. For example, there's a transcendent category is the self. There are actually schools of Buddhism, for example, that say there's no such thing as the self. Here in the West, on the Western side of things, in Western civilization, we tend to think of the self as the primacy of the self. But out there in Buddhist land, I don't know what the arguments are. I've never looked, but I know there are schools of Buddhism that say there is no such thing as the self. You are just a collection of sense impressions or something like that. So they are nominalists as it regards to the self. A nominalist is someone who is trying to take an abstract object and relegate it to the status of non-existent. Now, here's the problem if you're an atheist. Remember my definition of a rational actor. They decide on the better explanation 100 times out of 100. So they sign on to the better explanation. Why? That's the definition of rationality. A nominalist, in order for you to be a nominalist, you have to be a nominalist round the boards. There is no such thing as a halfway nominalist. There's no such thing as a sometimes nominalist. It doesn't buy you anything. Think of an atheist. You can't say, I'm an atheist, but there's a certain type of prayer I do, and when I do that prayer, God comes down and answers it. Okay, then you're not an atheist. Why? Because you can't be a halfway atheist. You're either an atheist all in, or you're not an atheist. Same thing for a nominalist. This is where it gets really, really, really dicey for nominalism. Why? Because there are more than one transcendent categories. And nominalists may have some good arguments with mathematical axioms, for example, to relegate those to the status of non-existent. Why? They've been working on that one for a long time. And they've tried to involve some of the biggest eggheads in history. So they may have pretty decent justifications with that particular one. But there are other ones where it gets really iffy for the nominalist, where it looks like they are relying on pretzel logic and begging the question. And you have to be a nominalist round the boards. Every time I bring up an abstract object, you have to be a nominalist with that one too, or it doesn't serve you at all. There's no such thing as a halfway nominalist. There's no such thing as a nominalist sometimes. You're either a nominalist all in, or you have agreed in principle to a form of Platonic realism. Do you understand why that's the case? And there should be no argument with that. I don't know if I said that clearly enough so that you understand that it's non-negotiable, but it's non-negotiable. If you are somewhat of a Platonic realist, then you might as well be a Platonic realist around the boards. Why? Because you are agreeing in principle to Platonic realism in a specific area. So why is this important? Because there are some types of nominalism that just don't work at all. Let's take, for example, universals versus particulars. Okay, it's common discussion in philosophy going back almost 2,000 years, or literally 2,000 years. A nominalist is literally trying to argue that there is no such thing as, generally speaking, cats, for example. If that sounds to you absurd, this is one that really, really doesn't work with nominalism. Okay? A nominalist is trying to say that there are only particular cats. So if I say, look at that group of animals over there, those 10 things with the whiskers and the meow, and you say to me, and I go, yeah, those are called cats, as opposed to dogs. The nominalist is saying, no, there's no such thing as, generally speaking, cats. That's literally what the nominalist is trying to argue for. It doesn't seem like that's what they're trying to argue for. Why? Because they're good at disguising the fact. Keep in mind, taxonomy is predicated on what? On clear differentiations between a group of things over there called cats as opposed to dogs. Every time there's an abstraction, a nominalist has to relegate it to the status of non-existent. If they agree in principle to any abstract object at all, they might as well agree round the boards. Why? Because we got them. They're a Platonic realist, period. You can't be a sometimes theist. If you think that God exists a little bit over here, you think God exists. If you can't be a sometimes atheist. If you think God doesn't exist, you can't, except for in this particular instance, then God exists. It doesn't work like that. Ditto for a nominalist. And with universals versus particulars, I'll show you. Okay, there's 3 types of nominalists. There may be more, but I only know of 3 off the top of my head. A trope nominalist, a resemblance nominalist, and a conceptual nominalist. And the nominalist is trying to say that's just a convenient label, hence nominalism, a name for what? Then you start digging in. Well, name for what, dude? And then it seems automatically like they are using pretzel logic and begging the question. Why? Ask them, name for what? What is the name that you're saying is just a convenient label predicated on? And try and answer the question without begging the question. Can't be done. For the qualities that the animals share. Yeah, the universal qualities that all the cats share of cat-likeness. They all meow. You can't call yourself a nominalist with universals versus particulars. Why? Because it automatically starts begging the question. They say it's just a convenient name. Ask them, name for what? For the thing that is the universal. Hello? Literally impossible to reconcile without pretzel logic and begging the question. So with that one, it's a slam dunk in favor of the Platonic realist, if you ask me. So, given that that is the case, and I hope that was convincing enough, if not, go look on your own. There's plenty of videos on universals versus particulars. Decide for yourself. Keep in mind, to some of the smartest people in the atheist community, do you ever hear of Ben Watkins? Ben Watkins? That's one of the smartest atheists around. That is one of the smartest atheists around. Now, I don't know if he's still a Platonic realist, but I heard him in one video with Tyler Vila describe himself as a Platonic realist. And that's like one of the smartest atheists around. Who you again? I'm nobody, Craig. We already established that. Yeah, we already established that. You're really hardcore, Craig. Yeah, too bad. They earned it. They earned it. That is one of the smartest atheists around, and you are exactly. There ain't nobody, Craig. There ain't no Ben Watkins, that's for sure. That's for dang sure. You ain't no Ben Watkins, chumply chump. So you ain't no Ben Watkins, chumply chump, whoever you are listening to me, unless you're Dave Rollins. Dave Rollins is bigger than Ben Watkins. Dave Rollins is huge. He's an omni-atheist. Dave Rollins eats Ben Watkins for breakfast and spits out philosophy that's better than Ben. I don't know. Dave Rollins just kicks ass all around the boards. Okay, the other atheist who I've heard is described as a Platonic realist is, drum roll please, Stephanie, drum roll. Terrible drum roll, Stephanie. I tried, Greg. All right. Didn't do very well. Alex Malpass. Alex Malpass, yeah, the best and the brightest in the atheist community. At least I've heard, I don't know for a fact that he is, but I heard him described as a Platonic realist. If he's a Platonic realist, game over. Why? Because he's the best and the brightest in the atheist community. Wouldn't surprise me if either of those two are actually still Platonic realists. Why? It's a better explanation. Almost routinely round the boards. There are a couple of times where nominalism works, but it has to work round the boards. And it doesn't. Now, why is this such a radical game changer? Just think this through. I doubt any of you atheists are going to accept this right on first hearing, so go back home and think about it. And I'll give you the tools to unpack the argument for yourself. Why? Stephanie, I got nothing to fear from anybody. The logic is pristine, and as I game it out thus far, borderline irrefutable. Okay, if those two are in fact Platonic realists, which I think they most might be, why? It's a better explanation. They are theists by another name. Oh! 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 It burns! It burns, Craig! You're burning them! You actually got them, right, Steph? We nailed them! It's theists by another name. Think about what a Platonic realist is actually agreeing to. They are saying that there is something in principle, a transcendent, immaterial, invisible realm that undercuts it, that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. That's what they're signing on to. It's theism by another name. Remember what I said theism, my definition of theism was. I don't care what your definition is. Why? Because mine is better. You say, they can't all be right, but they can all be wrong. What if all theists believe the same thing? And they all do. They all believe, just like the Platonic realist, that there is a transcendent, immaterial, invisible realm that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world. So a Platonic realist, even if they call themselves an atheist, is essentially a theist by another name. Examine it for yourself, unpack it at home, see that that is the case. They are agreeing in principle to a transcendent, immaterial realm. They just haven't populated it with the gods yet. But they're agreeing in principle to a form of theism. Promise. That's why there will never be, I respect Eric Steinhardt or Eric S. Reinhardt, whichever one is the actual name of the guy, I forget. John, it's your fault, John. One of them is the right name. You should have drilled it in my head. I blame John Buck. I respect him immensely for calling himself a Platonic atheist. But ultimately, I think there's no such thing. As soon as you sign on to Platonic realism, you are theist by another name. End of discussion. You see? Do you get it? I unpacked it for you. Stephanie has got you. I got you by the cojones. And now I squeeze. All right, relax, Stephanie. Nobody needed that image. Squeeze. All right, relax. Calm down, Stephanie. I love the passion, but it's too intense. Nobody needed that imagery of you crushing their nuts. All right, calm down, Stephanie. Crushing their nuts. All right, relax. I'm fired up, Greg. Can't wait to get him. All right, fine. I'm glad that you're fired up. Now, a couple more things to say, and then we'll be done with this particular video. Another, if I do say so myself, a killer of a video. really darn good. The reason why this is such a radical, good atheist is predicated on, what did I say? Materialism, naturalism, empiricism. There's almost no other isms in town that atheism is going to be predicated on. All of those isms are closed-end system, including naturalism. Their original configuration was to exclude all things transcendent and immaterial. Once you find out that you can't exclude transcendent, immaterial categories, why? They're the preconditions of intelligibility. All your sense-making apparati are there in the transcendent, immaterial realm. So you cannot exclude them. They are the preconditions of intelligibility. What I say empiricism is based on, the peripatetic axiom. But actual empiricism, Hume, if you're an atheism, you can trace your atheism back to Hume for the most part. That's when philosophy shifted. Prior to Hume, almost every philosopher was a theist. After Hume, a whole bunch of them signed on to materialism, empiricism, or atheism. Okay, but Hume was a good enough philosopher that he gave you the tools. He went deep enough to show you the contradictions in his own worldview. For a while, it was known as Hume's problem of induction. Now it's known as the problem of induction, but originally it was Hume's problem of induction. So he was a good enough thinker that he showed you his hand. My worldview doesn't make sense because it's predicated on what? An assumption, the regularities of nature not accounted for by my worldview. Empiricism fails on those grounds. And all of the self-contained isms fail on those grounds. Like I said, if you reduce matter and motion down to its fundamental building blocks, you have either on the one hand nothing, which is logical positivism, which is self-refuting and incoherent. When you actually reduce matter and motion down to its fundamental building blocks, you have what? Transcendent, immaterial, other than matter and motion. Oh, yeah. Not accounted for by atheism. Cannot be accounted for by atheism. Why? Because it's essentially theism by another name. That's it. Doesn't really matter if you guys believe me. I'll say this caveat again. Doesn't really matter. I don't foresee I foresee the smart set atheists being able to eke out some type of a draw, some type of a stalemate. But the bottom 80%, no, they don't even know what the F I'm talking about. They won't even know. They have no idea. I've gamed it out. I promise. You don't believe me? You can go look right now. T-Jump is a pretty intelligent guy. Pine Creek Doug is a pretty intelligent guy. Go look at the comments. You'll see 4 or 5 comments that are cogent and intelligent. And the rest of them, actually befuddled imbeciles. Ridiculous. Don't know what they're talking about at all. They wouldn't even know where to begin with this argument. Stephanie will eviscerate them morning, noon, and night, coming and going. She will slice them to ribbons. And, publicly humiliate them. And then what are you going to do against them? You got to pay attention, Greg. I'm sick of saying this. All right, relax. Tear out their innards and feed it to their children. It's pretty badass, I understand, but it's effective. Yeah, it's badass, those times. But it's really effective, Greg. They'll never debate me again, that's for sure. Yeah, okay, I'm pretty sure they won't. So you see how this is actually a killer argument. And I don't think it matters if you agree with me or not. Why? Because the ground underneath the atheist feet is shifting. Matter and motion is all there is, except that it isn't. Sean Carroll himself, one of the smartest of the physicalists around, gathered a who's who. I think I mentioned this in another video. If I didn't, it's worth repeating. A who's who of the best and the brightest of the Matter and Motion is All There Is crew. Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, name ring a bell, everybody heard of them? Some of them you haven't heard of, some of them are really well known. But they're the best and the brightest of that school of thought. And he titled the conference, it was a conference he gathered to try and resolve, called it Moving Naturalism Forward. Isn't that title interesting? Why? Because he's a naturalist. He described himself as a naturalist or a physicalist. Someone who really was confident in the position and knew that it was the right one wouldn't title it so hesitatingly. They title it Why Naturalism is the Way, the Truth, and the Life, and here's how we need to promote it to everyone out there. Instead, he titled it hesitatingly, Moving Naturalism Forward, implying quite clearly that naturalism needs to update and expand if it is to carry the day and move forward. Why? Because it isn't sufficient as it currently stands. None of those isms are. They cannot account for the world as it actually occurs. You want me to do one last argument on materialism? A lot of you liked my Metaphysics of Elvis Presley guitar. Mostly people just like the title, to tell you the truth. It's a cool title. Yeah, it's a cool title. The Metaphysics of Elvis Presley guitar. Okay, but it's a really good argument against materialism. And for transcendent categories, by the way. So think about it. You got your materialist in front of you. You got two guitars. One guitar is owned by Joe Schmo of Tuckahoe. Both of them came off the assembly line, identical to each other in their material constructs. One of those guitars was previously owned by Elvis Presley. Hence, one of those guitars is worth $50, and one of those guitars is worth $300,000. So you hand it over to the materialist and you say, do your thing, materialist. What? All knowledge is predicated on the peripatetic axiom, right? And you can just disassemble the material stuff and you're going to know everything there is to know, correct? Okay, tell me which one's Elvis Presley guitar. They're never going to figure it out. Why? Because it's not predicated on material facts. They can disassemble the material facts of both guitars, study it morning, noon, and night. They are never going to be able to tell you which guitar was owned by Elvis Presley. Why? Because it is not essentially a material fact. But yet it's extraordinarily important. This is very high. This argument is actually very much related to Hume's "You cannot derive an ought from an is." The is are the material facts of both guitars. The ought is part of the value system. One of those guitars, someone's going to pay $300,000 for. Why? Predicated on a value system. Because we heavily value Elvis Presley's music, and we heavily value Elvis Presley as a performer and a singer-songwriter. You know, we can't go on together with suspicion. Justifiably so, by the way. If you're not a fan of Elvis Presley, become one. Why? Because it's really great. With suspicious minds, suspicious, and we can't build our dreams of suspicious mind. We're caught in a trap. I can't walk out because I love you too much, baby. Older Elvis is underrated. Some of his really cool songs are from 1968 onwards. You know, the 70s version of Elvis Presley gets poo-pooed. We could call it Fat Elvis, but that's some of the coolest songs. Lord Almighty, I feel my temperature rising. Burning, burning, it's burning through to my soul. My brains are flaming, I don't know which way to go. Your kisses lift me higher. Like the sweet sound of a choir, you light my morning sky up, a burning love. Killer song. I did that at karaoke once. Nailed it. If I do say so myself. Doesn't sound like it, Greg? Yeah, it does. Yes, it does. Shut up. Does too. So, you get it? Now, if we want to find out which one's owned by Elvis Presley, we need to go appeal to what? A transcendent category. Isn't that interesting? If someone has a picture for a Polaroid snapshot, remember that? The Polaroid one step? Kodachrome. They give us those nice bright colors. They give us the dreams of summer. Make you think all the world is a sunny day. Oh, yeah. I got a night. Okay, I said Polaroid and then I sang about a Nikon camera. That's actually a really good song. That's Paul Simon. It was a hit in the 70s. It was a solo career. It's a good song. Kodachrome, I think it's called. Think that's what it's called. But anyways. So if you looked at a picture and you see Elvis Presley holding the guitar in that photo, then you know automatically which guitar was his and which one's worth $300,000. Okay, why is that interesting? Because that's a transcendent category. It's as if you went back in the past and took a snapshot of life then, and it's also the transcendent category of the unity of personhood over time and the past. Two transcendent categories you are using to what? To make an intelligible and rational decision regarding which guitar to buy. Why? Because one of the value systems, if you just rely on the material facts, you'll never know. Can't be decided. There's a better argument if you think about it. It's a lot clearer and more precise than, for example, Mary's Room and Chinese Room and zombie philosophical zombies. This is a lot easier to understand. And it decimates materialism without even dealing with the hard problem of consciousness. I can switch it to a hard problem of consciousness argument pretty easily. I think I have in other videos. Remember this person, Shannon? You ever heard of Shannon the Atheist? Shannon the Atheist, big star of atheism. Yeah, I understand that. Got a really good personality, right? Yeah, better than yours. I didn't ask. Thank you. I didn't ask. A lot better than yours, Craig. All right, fine. Got it. She has a really unique personality, right? Unique to her. Try and figure out, if you're a hard problem of consciousness person, you say, it's all brain, Craig, it's all brain processes. Try and locate where that would be in her brain processes. In her actual physical makeup, she is completely identical to another female of her kind. The personality is something unique to her, hence deeply subjective and tied to her whims and the subjective whims of the human being. Where would it be located as a physical process? Everywhere and nowhere. It transcends the whole. It would be all of them operating together, mysteriously tied to desires of the person. Try and work that one out, just according to the physical properties. It's just as complicated as the Elvis Presley guitar. Elvis Presley guitar is a better argument, why it's simpler to understand. That one's going to fry somebody's brain just thinking about it. Think about it. So it's a variation on the Elvis Presley guitar. Elvis Presley's guitar is a lot simpler. Two guitars, let's make it Jimi Hendrix. Okay, Fender Stratocaster, Jimi Hendrix was famous for playing. Two Fender Strats come off the assembly line circa 1963. One of them was picked up and played by none other than Jimi Hendrix. And he was saying, there must be some kind of way out of here, said the Joker to the thief. There's too much confusion, I can't get no relief. Business, wow, that didn't sound very good, did it? No, it did, Greg. No reason to get excited. Best line in the whole song, the thief he kindly spoke. There are many here among us who feel that life is but a joke. But you and I, we've been through that, and this is not our fate. So let us not talk falsely now. The hour's getting late. So let us not talk falsely now. The hour is getting late. Truer words have never been spoken. Now, one of those guitars is owned by Jimi Hendrix, Fender Strat. The other Fender Strat is identical in its material components. And it was picked up and played by none other than Joe Schmo from Tuckahoe. Ain't not very good guitars. One of those guitars is worth 300 grand. One of them is worth 50 bucks. Say you're a materialist, right? Yeah, I am. Explanatory power, it's physical processes, blah, blah, blah. Okay, tell me which one's which. Just according to the physical properties, you can't. You get it now? You can't. Insoluble. Materialism fails on just those grounds alone. Why? Because it lacks sufficient explanatory power. Can't tell you which guitar is which. Cannot derive the ought from the is. One of them you ought to pay 300 grand for. Why? Because it's owned by Jimi Hendrix and hence worth a lot of money. Extremely valuable. One of them you ought not to. Just according to the material facts, you will never know. Why? Because you cannot derive an ought from an is. These material facts is both of these guitars. I'm trying to say it, whatever. So there you have it, kids. Again, another slam dunk killer of a video. Stephanie is coming, and she really doesn't look happy to see you. So I would wise up and learn from the video. I think it's a killer argument. Examine it on your own. Like I said, do the research on your own. You'll find out that I'm not misrepresenting anything, including the history of philosophy. Go look at Hume. Look up Hume's problem of induction and look up Hume's take on metaphysics. Hume was the first logical positivist. Look up his take on metaphysics and why it's self-refuting. He's the first logical positivist. Then jump up to transcendent categories. Look up what they are. Look up abstract objects. Look up, there's plenty of videos out there on universals versus particulars or abstract versus nominalism. Decide for yourself. If you sign on to a form of Platonic realism, which you should do, why it's a better explanation around the boards, generally speaking, it's usually the better explanation. What I say a rational actor was, someone who decides on the better explanation 100 times out of 100. Now you are one of us. You are a theist by another name. Why? Because you are agreeing in principle that there is a transcendent, immaterial, invisible realm that undergirds and interacts with the known visible material world, just like me, the theist. I don't believe it's Jesus Christ, though. Fine, but you're still a theist. Fine, maybe not. You're still a theist. You get it? Do you get it? Yes, I get it. Now, the reason why nominalism took root is because people adopted nominalism for ideological reasons. That's why this is a strong argument. Why? Because they're looking down the field and they're seeing the implications. And they don't want to be the type of person that a Platonic realist implies they are, a more spiritual type of person. Why? Because they got some bug up their butt that it automatically means you're dumber or whatever. They got some bug up their butt about being that kind of person. So they don't want to sign on to anything spiritual. Why? Because, that would include every atheist. Now, the reason why this is such a powerful argument is almost all those atheists floating around out there are logical positivists, very, very close to it. And they have no idea why, because they don't examine their beliefs. They have no idea what they're talking about. They don't know philosophy at all. They're really, really dumb. Period. Really dumb. They call themselves a smart set. They're a pack of morons. Swear to God. Swear to God, go look at T-Jump's comments. Swear to God. The top 20% atheists are smart. There's nothing they can do. Why? There's no out. I don't see any other thing but yielding to the pristine logic of the argumentation, because I think it's a really quality argument. Okay? I don't see any other out. If you get Alex Malpass and say, you work on this, you know, he'll say something interesting, but I don't see how get out of it. He'll say something interesting and worth hearing for sure, but I don't see how get out of the logical implications of the argument. Why? Because Stephanie and I got him. We got him! We got him! We knew him! So, there you have it, kids. Again, another slam dunk of a video. Mass is over. Go in peace. Amen.